Hej allesammans. Varmt välkomna till Stadsbiblioteket. You're all very much welcome to the Stockholm Public Library. My name is Mats, librarian here in the house. And we are in a very good company tonight. We have the embassies of Chile, Argentina, and Colombia here. And obviously we also have three authors from the respective countries. I will be introducing them because we have an expert here with us from Argentina, Virginia Higa. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so it's my turn now. Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. We are very lucky because we are here with three Latin American writers, very interesting Latin American writers. And we need to thank the embassies of Argentina, Colombia, and Chile for organizing this event. And we need to thank the ambassadors of Argentina, Her Excellency Nélida María Contreras de Eker, Ambassador of Colombia, Her Excellency Sonia Durán Mela, and the Ambassador of Chile, His Excellency José Mario Goñi Carrasco. Also, we need to thank the cultural attaches of the embassy that have organized this event for us. And of course, Stadsbiblioteket and Max for his help tonight. Thank you so much. Before we start, I'm going to introduce the three writers that are here with us tonight. We have Andrea Herpanovic from Chile. Andrea is a narrator, essayist, and teacher. She has published the novels Escenario de Guerra and Geografía de la Lengua, the book of short stories No aceptes caramelos de extraños, and the book of chronicles Destinos Errantes. She studied sociology at Universidad Católica de Chile, and she has a PhD in Hispanic American literature from the University of California. She has received awards from the Critics Circle of Art and the National Book of and Reading Council from Chile. Also, part of her work appears in foreign anthologies and has been translated into other languages. Please correct me if there is something. We also have Jesus Lopez from Argentina. Jesus is a writer, psychologist, literature professor, and researcher in the fields of linguistics, psychology, and education. He is the director of the Center for Applied Linguistics, an institute based in Buenos Aires that conducts applied research. Along with his contributions to literature in the form of poems and narrative fiction, he is the author of research papers, textbooks, and audiovisual material for teaching Spanish. As a psychologist, he spends as much time on individual therapy as he does on therapy that takes place in groups or institutional settings. And we also have Pablo Montoya from Colombia. Pablo studied music at the Tunja Music School and later received a bachelor's degree in philosophy and literature from the Santo Tomás University in Bogotá. He obtained his PhD in Hispanic and Latin American Studies from the Sorbonne Nouvelle University in Paris. He has published more than 20 books, including essays, novels, short stories, and poetry. He has won several literature awards, such as the latest Rómulo Gallegos Prize in 2016 for his novel Tríptico de la Infamia. That's right.
Yes, yes.
Which has also won the José Donoso Prize, and more recently, the Premio Casa de las Américas from Cuba. He is also a critic, a translator, and professor of literature at the University of Antioquia in Colombia. So this is our guests tonight. After the talk, you will also have the opportunity to find some of their books for sale. So if you're interested, you can also take a look. And we also have books that the embassies have brought, books by other Latin American authors that are over there. So, we will try to make this conversation if we can. And hopefully at the end, if you're interested, you can also ask some questions. The name of the panel for tonight was New Approaches of Latin American Literature. And so this is the topic that has brought us together. And I'm sure that the three of you agree that this is a very vital moment for Latin American literature. Very vital and very heterogeneous at the same time. There have several years have passed since the Latin American boom of the 1960s, which was this very big movement that had international repercussions. And it was a movement that had a very strong commitment with recounting and explaining Latin American history and societies, and also a very strong will to build a national literature. So as opposed to that period, today, what we have today in the scene is a much more heterogeneous literary scene. We don't have movements or common aesthetics, right? In different countries, but also in general. So the first question that I would like to ask the three of you, it's a very general question, but I would like to know, what do you think, in what ways do you think Latin American literature today, what ways does it find to account for its past, both historic and literary? How do you think literature refers to its past, or what does it do with its own past? What do you think? Who wants to start? There?
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks to the Chilean Embassy here in Sweden, especially to Mireia Garcia and Ambassador José Goñi, and to my editor from Denmark, Guillermo Camacho. The three of them are here. And thank you also for this great library for hosting us. I wrote a brief text, like a personal approach to the first question. We knew the questions. So I feel more confident writing in English than maybe in the first turn. I will read. Once, I was part of an anthology of short stories titled "The Future is Not Ours." The title says more or less the condition we have as writers and citizens. We own, in a way, the past, but we don't own the future. We imagine the future. Our personal experience shapes our view of the world. We are inclined to put together the pieces we want to remember, and these become our individual memory. Memory is one of the several versions of history. Memory is always an exercise of working around black holes. Memory is a dense, chaotic, and poetic territory. I like the idea that fiction is a possible answer to that undeterminedness of black holes. As an author, you are trying to fill those black holes with your material. Fiction creates an alternative reality. In writing, you can go beyond any limits, even beyond your own geography. I like the idea of fiction working with histories that are beyond the scene. They are not told, not written. In memory, we don't recall, we reconstruct the past. Memory is also a collective process of remembrance and omissions. In a way, any creator is putting together in the table a version of history among others. My version is something like this. I am the child of people who survived the Second World War, and a person who lived as a child and teenager under military dictatorship. I am not writing my parents' story or about the adults victims of dictatorship. I can't. Maybe I'm writing the response to catastrophic loss, about the need to start a second life. The answer to catastrophic loss was reimagination. I'm interested in the idea that imagination is working with the what if. What if I were an adult during the military coup? As an uncertainty has become a critical part of my process. It allows me to have these accidents and reversals. I confess that I write with the naive hope of correcting history, my history, and that of my time. As a writer, I have been interested in working on violence in memory, in individual and collective stories. I wish to take this violence to an aesthetic proposition, to a form that contains the destructive force, demolishing characters and plots, signs and signifiers, and even searches the cause for images bearing beauty. More or less for the first part. The idea of memory is very important in memory, very important to recall the past, and this crossing of personal and collective stories around violence.
And also the idea that you reconstruct memory, you
Yes.
don't recall memory. It's
Yeah.
something you do.
Of course, yes. Yeah, because you have a lot of omissions, or you have a will to find a different form to the idea of the past of the memory. So I do think fiction is more in that way, working with the imagination or the creating of a different past.
Does any of you want to add something?
Yes. Well, your question was how do we take care of our own heritage, no? An American heritage. I think in the same line as Andrea, I think that the fact that we are writers doesn't allow us to consider ourselves as prophets or people especially inspired and so on. I mean, every one of you is a writer, even potentially or either potentially or actually. In fact, if you, any of you, don't write what has in mind, it will be lost forever. Because every one of us is an individual, and what we think and what we write, nobody will write if we don't do it. So, I think that our heritage, where is our heritage, our Latin American heritage? It is in the people that surround us in Latin America, people we deal with everyday life. In the grocery store, in the street, in the schools, in the companies, in the business, in every place. So, I think that the way to make contact with our heritage is to make contact with people. A writer should be someone with the ears wide open, and someone who makes people speak up and makes people write, and someone who incorporates what people says, what people thinks. The heritage is not in books, but in the persons, living persons that are with us. What we write is just an elaboration of what you or any Latin American person who is with us makes, says, listens, and thinks. So, I think that's the way to connect us with, I don't know, our Spanish heritage or the multiple heritage of the different cultures that have swarmed into Latin America, and the native cultures is to go around Latin America and speak with people and live with them and being more honest and deep listener. That's what I think.
Buenas tardes a todos. Quiero agradecer muy especialmente a la embajadora de Colombia, a Sonia, su generosa invitación a este evento. Bueno, voy a hablar en español, no en inglés. Ofrezco mis excusas, mi inglés para hablar no es sólido.
So, Pablo Montoya would like to thank the Ambassador Sonia for the opportunity of being here, and he apologizes for not speaking in English. as he doesn't speak it so well, so I'll be translating for him today.
Bueno, en realidad yo pienso que nosotros, escritores latinoamericanos, somos hijos de una tradición. Y esa tradición literaria tiene un momento espléndido, que es lo que se denomina el boom latinoamericano. Ese boom lo representan particularmente 4 escritores muy conocidos en el mundo, que son García Márquez, Mario Vargas Llosa, Carlos Fuentes y Julio Cortázar.
So, the heritage that we have in South America that a lot of authors are children of comes from the boom, as he calls it, that is consisted by Gabriel García Márquez, Vargas Llosa,
Julio Cortázar y Carlos Fuentes.
And Carlos Fuentes.
Heredamos de ellos la preocupación por el lenguaje, heredamos de ellos la preocupación por la historia y el pasado, heredamos de ellos una suerte de conciencia universalista y siempre los hemos leído con gratitud y con admiración, por supuesto, porque representan, sin duda alguna, altos momentos de la literatura latinoamericana y universal.
So, a lot of the heritage from these authors consists of an interest for the language itself, also for the history and the past, and also for a universal conscience. And the Latin American authors today have a lot of very grateful and admire these authors very much.
Sin embargo, nosotros como escritores contemporáneos no solamente debemos recibir esta tradición, sino que es fundamental renovarla. Y esa renovación de alguna manera la exige la problemática de nuestros países en el momento actual. Países, particularmente Colombia, que es de donde yo soy, que ofrecen una riqueza y una complejidad social, cultural, de grandes desafíos. Y yo creo que la literatura nuestra, de algún modo, debe tratar de reflejar de la manera más genuina esa compleja realidad.
In Latin American authors, and especially in Colombia, we have not only to receive and accept the heritage in the literature, but also to renew it. And one of the challenges is to treat the very rich and complex culture that has many origins in South America, and to reflect the complexity of the culture and the cultural heritage in our countries.
Entonces, me parece que es fundamental que nuestra carta de presentación, en tanto que escritores latinoamericanos contemporáneos, sea decirles a ustedes que somos hijos de una tradición, que somos herederos de una tradición, evidentemente afincada en especial en la lengua española, pero que al mismo tiempo tenemos un gran reto, que es tratar de nombrar de una manera, digamos, en la medida de lo posible original, nuestras problemáticas actuales. Y eso es lo que fundamentalmente hacen casi todos los escritores en todas las épocas, ¿no? Renovar una tradición y de alguna manera respetarla.
So the great challenge of the authors today in South America, as it is in the rest of the world, is not only to accept the heritage, but also to name and I guess to describe the challenges that present themselves in the social sphere of these countries.
So you spoke about renovar, no? To renew a tradition, and Andrea also spoke about memory and constructing memory instead of just recalling memory. So when we were preparing this talk, we came across this famous sentence from Borges, which is that the Argentinian writer or the South American writer has actually a great freedom because our tradition is not only South American or Latin American tradition, but it's like a universal literature. That's the freedom that you were, I think, referring to when you said that we have to renew these things, that we have a great literary past, but we have to do something new with it, right? And we are exploring different things. Is it okay? Do you need translation or?
Sí, yo creo que particularmente en mi caso, que he escrito novelas históricas, novelas que han intentado registrar el pasado, me parece que ir al pasado no es escapar de la realidad actual, sino que es dar un paso adelante y que es fundamental rastrear el pasado para decirle al lector o para darle al lector herramientas propias para interpretar su presente.
So, Pablo has written a lot of historic novels, and for him, the act of doing so is not only to register the past or to escape the present, but also to describe the current situation that we're in by describing and understanding our history and our past.
You mean, because you've written a novel, for example, about Rome, about ancient Rome, right? But at the same time, it's not, the present always seems to filter in your work. It's the same with you, right? Andrea, you've written about your father's past or the violence in Chile, but, you know, from a contemporary point of view, at the same time, right? I mean, you can say things about the present by talking about the past. How do you feel about this? Do you feel that you have to review the past in order to understand the present more?
Of course, yes, of course. But at the same time, I would like to add an idea, what Pablo said. That is, I have some troubles with the boom. It's not very polite to say it this way, but I want to explain myself. Of course, the boom, like the canon of the boom, they were great. They are still great writers. They wrote some masterpiece. I don't know, like Crónica de una muerte anunciada. For me, it's very hard to translate that title.
García
or Rayuela in the case of Cortázar. But at the same time, I feel they had a lot of omissions, because they weren't the only ones writing in a very high level. There were more authors, like Manuel Puig in Argentina, Severo Sarduy in Cuba, Clarice Lispector in Brazil, Elena Garro in Mexico. So sometimes I feel like I'm comfortable with the idea of the canon of the boom, because they didn't, for example, represent a lot of subaltern voices, like, for example, women is really underrepresented. So I think cases like Elena Garro, who is very similar to the first novel of García Márquez, Recuerdos del Porvenir, sorry for the translation, I don't know how to say it, and Cien Años de Soledad, very similar. Some people said that the first was Garro and then García Márquez. It doesn't matter, because it's not a copy, of course, it's a dialogue in different situations. And in the case, for example, of Manuel Puig, he wrote about women in small towns in Argentina. So it's a different epic. In a way, the boom was very epic, with the idea to make a great novel of like a a picture, a big picture,
national novel.
yeah, the big picture of the society, and of course they did it wonderful. But at the same time, I miss a lot of things, and I miss also the voices of the pre-Hispanic or native population, like for example, Arguedas did it in the case of Peru. His novel, Los Ríos Profundos, how is the deep rivers, is wonderful. And the story, of course, of the tensions in the Peruvian society, but at the same time, he inserts a lot of imagination and phrases from the Quechua, from the Peruvian native language. It also is the same case with Rulfo, and I would say with other Rosario Castellanos. So I have some troubles with the heritage.
With the canon of the book.
Yes, and it's a very chauvinism, machista, you say chauvinism. It's very strange for me, the word, that I always check the word. Very chauvinism canon, I think.
Yes. And there's also an underlying, how would I say, tissue, basic tissue, living tissue of writers and oral producers, no? In Latin America, and everywhere, no? Who make and produce texts all the time, take texts and change them and make new versions. And we writers and all the writers are only the ones who, you know, take from this basic tissue of people, tissue like the tissues in the biological context, you know? This big set of cells who produce language all the time to make our texts, to produce our texts. For instance, I happen to be a psychologist at the same time. You know? Well, being a psychologist is a heavy burden because you are responsible for, you know, the well-being of your patients. But there's also another aspect. You receive from every patient the whole story of life and a whole set of experiences. And if you work properly, you know that these experiences are without comparison with any other experiences, and at the same time have a lot of relations and relationships with other stories and with the culture that surrounds us, the therapist and the patient, both of us. No? So that's one example. But a writer can be any kind of person. For instance, a writer can be someone who sells machines in a place, and when he has free time, writes. And what does he write about? He writes about what people tell him. He writes using his knowledge, his technical knowledge. He uses what he has. For instance, there's a writer, famous writer belonging to the famous canon we were talking about, Sábato in Argentina, who was a scientist, no? And he took from the living tissue of scientists who surrounded him the materials for the building of his plots. That's why his plots are so exact, so precise, and his prose is so, at the same time, logical and metaphorical. No? So, being, for instance, a teacher gives you the opportunity to hear and to share the stories of your students and to see and experience your students criticizing you and making you tell your own story to them. Well, that's a marvelous, you know, surrounding Umwelt, as the Germans say, to produce writing, to produce novels, to produce short stories, to produce poems, and scripts for films, and so on. So I think that we all agree that there are at least three layers of people who produce. The very famous ones who appear in the newspapers are you know, very well sold. The ones who are very, very good but not so known, as you said, Andrea. And the tremendous anonymous mass of writers and oral producers of literature, which, you know, enable us, the ones who put time and professional knowledge in writing, to write what we write.
Sí, siempre comenzamos, evidentemente, mencionando a los escritores más conocidos en el mundo europeo. Pero cuando a mí me han preguntado sobre el panorama actual de la literatura colombiana, por ejemplo, evidentemente que reconozco que hay un mapa subterráneo, anónimo, como tú dices, desconocido, que es fundamental estudiarlo para poder entender y comprender el verdadero rostro de la literatura colombiana. Entonces, por ejemplo, no hay que desconocer el aporte que están haciendo actualmente las literaturas indígenas en Colombia, las literaturas afrodescendientes, que son prácticamente desconocidas o que están prácticamente desconocidas en el mundo actual, pero que son también o forman parte también de la literatura colombiana.
There is subterranean map, so to speak, of that is very important to describe in, for example, Colombian literature, that consists of the tales of indigenous people and of Afro-descendants that don't get the same attention in other parts of the world, that are very important to describe, study, and to understand in order to really know what Colombian literature is today. And it's something that we don't talk about so much outside of the big capital, so to speak.
Of course, we have access to the books that get published. Of course, there are a lot of people writing and we don't really know all of them, or we don't really access some maybe oral literature, but we do have access to what is published, and that is another, I think, a topic for another discussion. But at the same time, I wanted to ask you, because you talked about these other writers of the boom that were not as known or as renowned, maybe internationally, as Manuel Puig or Elena Garro. Do you feel that you are that you have inherited something from these writers? Do you recognize yourselves in the aesthetics of the writers of the boom, or of Manuel Puig, or of Silvino Campo?
Well, it's a mix. It's so difficult to just identify one author. In a way, I like the literature of these subaltern voices, yes. And I also like a lot of the work around the body. And I think also our political events trace a different literature, especially in the case of Argentina and Chile after the military dictatorships. It's very interesting. What happened with the thing with the body is very cruel. I think the way the body is written in the novels and the short stories, and it makes sense. It was so hard to, there's a lot of disappeared people. It was, you have the experience of torture, so it makes sense that afterwards you have a writing that is connected with the body in a very violent way. And also, I would say that right now in a contemporary writing, is a writing more individual. You don't have utopias, collective utopias. And I would say also that you have been in touch with this neoliberal system that is very selfish. Probably something that in Sweden is very strange because you have a very different social organization, but the thing of the poverty for us is not something that we have solved. At the same, you see in these very modern buildings, like, very modern buildings, but you may see a little boy asking for money, and you have a lot of tensions.
Contrast.
Yes, a lot of contrast and tensions, social tensions that in a way are part of this writing of the new literary projects. Yeah, there's a lot of isolation, I think, in the new novels I have read.
Yo quisiera aprovechar lo que dice Andrea para contarles algo de lo que está pasando actualmente en Colombia. Evidentemente la literatura colombiana actual está hecha de esos contrastes que tú señalas. Hay tantas facetas, tantas maneras de abordar la realidad colombiana o latinoamericana, que sería muy difícil en realidad hablar de todas ellas. Es un panorama muy multifacético. Pero sí hay una circunstancia actual que los escritores colombianos nos estamos preguntando, y es lo que está suscitando en este momento los acuerdos de paz entre el gobierno y las guerrillas de extrema izquierda.
So there is, like Andrea said, a lot of different ways of describing the social situation and the social tensions in South America. But specifically in Colombia, there's also a new challenge of trying to describe what is going to become of the peace treaties and what effect that is going to have, I guess, in society and the challenge, I guess, is to learn how to describe it and to, yeah.
Entonces, a mí me preguntan continuamente en los eventos académicos y literarios de Colombia, ¿qué debe hacer el escritor en tiempos de paz? Tenemos compromisos, debemos escribir sobre esa circunstancia, es obligación del escritor colombiano y latinoamericano escribir sobre lo que está pasando actualmente, cómo narrar la violencia pasada, ¿sí? Cómo escribir una literatura en tiempos de paz. Goethe, el gran escritor alemán, decía que los escritores nunca estamos en tiempos de paz, ¿sí? Siempre estamos convulsos de algún modo. Entonces, lo que quiero decir es que en este momento quizás pasó algo parecido con el fenómeno de las dictaduras en Argentina y en Chile. En Colombia estamos preguntándonos actualmente qué debemos escribir en este momento actual.
There is a lot of question about, a lot of authors ask themselves, what do we write in times of peace, which related to the dictatorships in Argentina and Chile. One could compare it to the violence that has been going on in Colombia, and as an author we have to ask ourselves what is our new task, and how to what should we write in times of peace, and also how do we describe the past violence that has been. And as Goethe says, writers are never in times of peace.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that we've become three persons who talk about the same thing. I mean, we talk in the form of questions. What do we do? No? What is going on? What's happening? Our reality is so complex, no? And it happens to me because you asked us, you asked Andrea who she thought was the person who inspires, who inspired,
if she feels inspired by this,
if she feels inspired, especially
by authors that she admires, but how does she elaborate this in her own writing?
I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about myself. I really feel inspired. I mean, of course, we read each other's literature, and we read our colleagues. But for me, the first source of inspiration are really the ordinary people, especially the common people who doubt, the people who are not sure, the people who ask questions, the people who make mistakes, the people who don't have a doctrine or, you know, some fixed statements to judge the reality. Because our reality in Latin America is so complex. I join Paulo in saying, what do we do in terms of peace? In Argentina, we also have times of peace, but the peace is not so complete as it seems to be. And there are lots of things to solve, lots of poverty, as Andrea said, to remedy, lots of work to do to have, for instance, good, sane and well-working society and groups into the society, political, working class groups, intellectual groups, scientific groups, etc. So we are in, I feel we are in the field of doubt, in the field of building, in the field of a task that requires not too many securities and a lot of work. That's why in my fiction there are some kind of characters who have a privilege. For instance, the children who live in doubt and in question all the time, and who are always putting the finger where it doesn't have to be put on. The children, the outsiders, the people who are in the midst of a conflict, the people who have 2 or 3 points of reference and don't know where to go, etc. I think that we writers are in the same situation. We're always criticizing ourselves and trying to improve our production. But in terms of making contact with different aspects of our reality and trying to create something, because, you know, creation is just making things that don't have anything to do with each other, making with them something new. And that's the difficulty.
Very difficult. And so I would like to go back to what Paulo said, and it has to do with what you just said. How do you feel, the three of you? This is a very general question, but how do you feel, or what do you feel is your own approach to this, to Latin American reality now? How do you do that in your literature? How do you write about the present? How do you write about violence? How do you write about the past?
Bueno, el escritor puede escribir sobre lo que quiera. Lo importante en la escritura es escribir bien, es construir un relato bien construido. Yo creo que era García Márquez quien decía que el gran reto del escritor es escribir bien. Ya los compromisos sociales, políticos, culturales vienen en un segundo plano. Ahora bien, yo entiendo lo que dice Jesús frente a esa, y lo que dice también Andrea, esa realidad tan llena de cosas, pues yo creo que Colombia está atravesando una situación que antes no se le había presentado al escritor. Es decir, la necesidad de rastrear el pasado, sobre todo el pasado conflictivo, el pasado de la violencia tan fuerte. Bueno, ¿cómo narrar esa violencia? Esa es la gran pregunta. Pero los escritores ahora están como lanzados a ese desafío.
A reescribir eso.
Eso, a reescribir eso. O sea, Roberto Bolaño decía, y otros escritores decía que lo más importante, que el deber del escritor es hundir la cabeza en lo oscuro.
Sí, claro.
Y esa oscuridad, en el caso colombiano, digo yo, y en este momento actual, es esa terrible violencia que ha vivido el país, particularmente en los últimos 50 años. ¿Sí? Entonces, ese es un gran desafío. ¿Cómo? Bueno, o es lo que nos estamos preguntando una buena parte de los escritores colombianos actuales, sin desconocer, por supuesto, lo que tú estás diciendo, que evidentemente la literatura ofrece una gran cantidad de temas y todos son, por supuesto, plausibles.
The reality is, excuse me. Excuse me, everybody.
So what Pablo was saying is that one of the most important tasks of writing is not only to describe all the different questions and aspects of society, but it's first and foremost to write well, whatever it is you're writing, as Gabriel García Márquez said. And the second priority, so to speak, would be to describe the political and cultural challenges that present themselves in the different countries. And right now in Colombia there's a situation that hasn't presented itself before, which is the challenge of representing and retracing the past and rewriting the past also, which is something that Colombian authors have to, are asking themselves how to do that, because one of the things, one of the main things about writing is to put your head in the darkness, and in Colombia it would be the terrible violence that has ravaged the country since 50 years ago or so. And even though literature obviously, society offers a lot of different themes to write about.
You wanted to add something?
Yes, maybe after hard times, what is going on in Colombia or everywhere, it takes like at least one or two generations talking about the facts that those political problems had. So I think the idea of the writing in peace times is impossible, because probably what writers and art, I don't know, film, any kind of art, is doing is writing the facts that goes into the intimacy. I think after the idea of the violence, the injustice, the betrayal, all those very complex experience, probably it takes, I don't know, 1-2 generations that you will see those problems in a different sphere, probably the domestic and the family sphere. And that's why I think in my own work, I try to think about that, how the violence is present in the family, in these very close relationships between parents and children, between siblings, and I also used a lot this child's perspective.
Yes.
I like a lot this, it's very tricky in a way, how you said, it looks like this subject that is always in doubt. that do not know, but at the same time is very sensitive. So
The voice of the children.
yeah, the voice of the children. Yeah, seeing this very hard experience. And for example, on Thursday in this same library, you will have the chance to hear this great writer, Herta Miller. I'm really suffering because I'm leaving tomorrow, and he's one of my favorite writers. Before he won the Nobel Prize, I have reading her like 20 or 30 years ago, and she has other female authors I will recognize. I feel very inspired by female authors in Chile and outside of Chile, and she also used a lot this child's perspective to think about what she lived or the society lived in Romania, you say? Under Ceausescu regime. So, and yes, so to return to the idea of my own work, I have written a lot of stories that are very controversial, a kind of rough stories, because I like the idea to push my characters to an abyss, and in that abyss they may change, think, have some revelations. So I like a lot of the idea of the literature as a moral frame, as a moral como un marco moral,
moral
frame,
yes.
yeah, where characters have to decide different things, very complex, take decisions very complex according to their own experience that had to do with violence. And there's a lot of things, of course, in Latin America, but it's very hard to think about why we have so many feminicidios. How is it in English? Feminicidios?
Femicides?
Murders.
Yeah, murders of women.
Of women, and in a very cruel way, like rituals.
Yeah.
So I may think I have to be related to maybe pre-Columbine story, the rituals of how you kill somebody else, and also, of course, with our experience with political violence. It's a very hard thing, and nowadays in Latin America, there's a whole movement of ni una menos, and I think it has to do with this political and this intimacy sphere.
So you think, the three of you, apart from being writers, you have, I think, a different perspective, because the three of you have other studies or other professions,
Other
right?
activities, yes.
And when you talk about violence in the public sphere, I was thinking about what we were talking before. You are also as a sociologist, so you have a broad vision of society. You are a psychologist. You also have a different approach to human experience. And Pablo, well, you're a musician, but you are interested in the arts in general, right? So, do you think literature has a special way for talking about, for explaining this, for explaining violence, for explaining human experience that other disciplines cannot really express?
The main difference is the detail. It's very concrete literature. It's about one person in one place with some objects. Memory is very concrete. It's not an abstract thing. So that's why I moved from sociology to literature, because I like the details. I like the small scale, and I like a lot the inner mental life you can read through the fiction.
Yes, I think that another thing that characterizes literature, that distinguishes literature from other approaches, is that when you write a novel, you write a complex text, a text with not only one purpose. Well, you can have one concrete purpose, but you finish by writing a text in several levels. No? And this is not because you're a heavy intellectual human being, it's because you base your writing in, as Andrea says, in concrete life. And concrete life is very, very, very complex. No? So I like very much to introduce doubt in situations. In situations of violence, in situations of ordinary life that seem so simple as to borrow a book from a library. Borrowing a book from a library can be, epic history in the interior of a character, can be a comic thing for another one, can be a drama, a psychologic drama for a third one, and so on. I think that in Argentina we live all the days of our life, live among a very, 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 very many-colored society with a lot of complexities and a lot of varieties. And our job is, I think, at least in Argentina, is to try to assemble as best as possible the pieces of our puzzle, which is a very difficult one.
Una de las cosas que más me ha preocupado a mí a la hora de ponerme a escribir algunos de mis libros es trabajar la relación entre la literatura y las artes, la música, la pintura, la fotografía. O sea que el tema de mis libros es, de alguna manera, cómo los artistas, para crear sus respectivas obras, se confrontan con medios turbulentos socialmente.
Con la violencia.
Con la violencia. Estos libros, estas novelas mías, no solamente tienen que ver con Colombia, sino que hacen miradas a otras épocas y a otros momentos históricos. Entonces, me parece que el arte es, en lo que a mí respecta, me ha ayudado mucho a recrear estos ámbitos tocados por la violencia, que no es colombiana ni latinoamericana, sino que es una violencia más o menos humana y universal.
Sí, sí. Claro.
So, Pablo has been, in his literature, very preoccupied with the relationship between literature and also the other arts, as music, painting, photography, and he tries to see how, through the view of the artists, we can confront themes such as violence that is not only a violence that is Colombian or Latin American, but is human.
Sí, quisiera brevemente hablarles de una de mis novelas que se llama Tríptico de la Infamia, para que ustedes comprendan un poco de qué estoy hablando. Tríptico de la Infamia aborda las relaciones entre Europa y América en el siglo XVI. Pero yo, para trabajar esta relación, me apoyo en tres pintores europeos del siglo XVI, protestantes, que tuvieron una relación muy intensa con las guerras de religión en Europa y con la conquista de América en el Nuevo Mundo, ¿no? Me parecía importante hurgar en el origen de nuestras sociedades latinoamericanas, hurgar ese momento crítico que es el descubrimiento y la conquista de América. Entonces, para hacerlo, acudí a las pinturas, a los grabados que se hicieron en el siglo XVI, a diferentes pinturas, a la representación de los indígenas y del exterminio indígena que se hizo aquí en Europa. Pero me interesó trabajar eso porque me parece que ha habido una continuidad de la violencia en nuestro continente. Entonces invito al lector a que se hunda en el siglo XVI, pero para que pueda comprender la violencia de nuestra actualidad.
So in one of his books, Tríptico de Infamia, Pablo, he treats the relation between Europe and America in the 16th century. And he does so by describing the situation of three painters that were Protestant and that were in the context of the European religious wars and also the conquest of America. And he does so in order to excavate, so to speak, in our societies today, how the painters of Europe chose to describe the critical moment that was the conquest of America, the violence towards the indigenous people, and so it is a way of understanding how that violence has been carried through the generations into our society today in South America.
Speaking about violence, if I may.
Yes, but I think we don't really have
30 seconds.
much time left. But
No.
because the idea is that you can read an excerpt
All right.
of one of your texts so that people can listen to your text in Spanish. And then after that, we have some more time. If we have some more time, we can resume the conversation, or
Public
people
may ask questions
if they want.
Yes.
So, is that okay? Do you want to read now?
Sonia,
Señor.
¿tú tienes Tríptico de Infamia?
Yes. Andrea, would you like to start?
I will read in English. This is one of my short stories. I should begin.
Yes, sure.
Translated into English, the name is Family Tree. Is part of this short story collection. Do not accept candies from strangers. That is going to be translated into Danish by my editor here, Aurora Boreal. And so I will read some scenes of this short story. Probably it's going to be hard to follow the plot, just to have an idea of the story and maybe the sound. I don't know when children's book first began to interest me. Ever since the priests, the senators, and businessmen started floating their elusive gazes on the television screen. I would thought about the curves or the buttocks ever since children's diaries had become valid evidence in courts of law. My daughter Teresa would catch these new stories from the corner of her eye and stop what she was doing. We had been living alone for 5 years, since her mother left. My daughter never said or asked anything about the episode. I never knew whether they two had talked the night before. No one who packs a suitcase and closes the door with such determination comes back. Things continue to go strangely. Now, if I invited a woman over for coffee, Teresa traveled around the house and made strange noises through the walls. I will skip. It was absurd, but I felt harassed by my own daughter. I imagined her like an animal in heat that couldn't distinguish its prey. She slank along the walls with her hair on end, her muzzle wet, her ears fallen. How could I tell her to go look for a boyfriend instead? She was a female animal, scattering her hormones around the house. The night came when I couldn't avoid her seduction. We collapsed on the mattress, feeling the warmth of the teeth. I open myself to receive the flame of one who was wanted you for a long time. I connect with the memory of the lost appetite. I was kissing myself. I was caressing my own marked bones. I traced my narrow forehead. In the distance, the sound of the rattling gate. With every caress, I imbibe her youth and tenders, her palms softer than mine. My skin again hers, the blow softened by the same essence. Suddenly, I saw the amorphous mass of our bodies in a mirror on the wall. I saw myself with the empty sockets of her eyes. I threw a shoe to destroy the image, but not our embrace.
Who wants to continue?
Okay, I'd like to ask a question to the public. How many of you would understand Spanish, a text in Spanish?
Everybody.
Is that the majority? Oh,
Majority.
Fine. So, Pablo, go ahead. All right. Okay. I'll read you just 5 minutes, the first 5 minutes of a suspense story. If any of you want to know who's the murderer or what's the end, well, it's in my book. But I think that this is the best I can do for you, to read something that would raise some kind of questions. No? Okay, the story is called El Viaje. The funny thing is that the main character is called Pablo, but it's not him. Not him at all. Don't you worry, nothing will happen. Pablo bajó del micro encorvado y con la cabeza gacha para evitar el choque con el dintel de la portezuela. Permaneció un rato inmóvil en la banquina de la autopista. Después bostezó y se acomodó lentamente una enorme mochila de cuero en la espalda ancha hasta dejarla tensa de correas como un animal estaqueado. Al pie de la pequeña barranca que orillaba la autopista, comenzaba la penumbra de la ciudad, que se extendía hasta el horizonte invisible. Una noche empastada de focos dispersos, amarillos, verdosos. Bajó lentamente por unos viejos escalones de cemento, semiocultos entre el pasto. Enfiló por una vereda jalonada de paraísos viejos. Baldosas rotas, retazos de tierra sembrados de escombros, resaca de hojas secas, vainas, pequeños frutos redondos que reventaban y crujían bajo las suelas de goma dura. Se echó el pelo hacia atrás, se desperezó sin detener la marcha, cruzó una calle y se internó en una vereda de sombras densas. Había una obra en construcción en la mitad de la cuadra. Una empalizada cubierta de carteles, cubiertos de estratos superpuestos de papel, un volquete herrumbrado junto a la vereda. 10 metros antes de la esquina siguiente, trastabilló. Se agachó y recogió del piso una billetera. Bastante nueva, negra. La dio vuelta y la escudriñó con 2 dedos. Un ticket de American Express cayó revoloteando. Miró en torno pensativo. Había solo un viento suave en la calle que columpiaba las ramas de los paraísos. El ruido frenético de la autopista había quedado lejos. Un gato junto a él trepó despaciosamente por una pared de revoque rugoso. Inmediatamente después, un gemido cortó el aire, un corto hilo lamentoso terminado en un pequeño grito ahogado. Pablo dejó caer la billetera y miró a derecha e izquierda. Se metió un dedo en el oído y hurgó brevemente. Quedó inmóvil 2 segundos y levantó el pie derecho para retomar la marcha. En ese momento se oyó otro gemido, más fuerte, entrecortado. Dio media vuelta y fue hasta la empalizada de la obra. Miró por las rendijas. Después empezó a revisar los autos estacionados junto a la vereda. Un tercer gemido se dibujó entonces a 1 metro entre 2 bocinazos lejanos. Pablo se enderezó, giró y quedó enfrentado al volquete. Caminó hacia él con pasos largos y rápidos. Puso una mano en el borde cubierto de polvo. Estaba cargado de escombros hasta desbordar. Lo cubrían unos enormes cartones, un embalaje de heladera desplegado. Pablo cerró y abrió los ojos, levantó la mano derecha y quedó inmóvil. 5 segundos después, empezó a tomar forma un nuevo quejido muy agudo. Pablo aferró el cartón, respiró hondo y tiró. Una pequeña avalancha de cascotes se estrelló contra el empedrado. En el centro del volquete, una mujer yacía boca arriba, desparramada de brazos y piernas, estrujada de arrugas, la ropa negra, los párpados fruncidos, la boca abierta, la respiración acesante. Pablo quedó inmóvil unos segundos. Luego volvió la cabeza hacia todos lados, al acecho. 2 cuadras más adelante, una pareja cruzó la calle y desapareció. Pablo apretó los párpados y los volvió a abrir. La mujer cascó un sollozo corto, ronco. Bruscamente, Pablo se inclinó sobre el volquete y le tocó la cabeza. «Señorita», dijo en voz baja y rápida, «señorita, ¿qué te pasó?» Pablo carraspeó y tosió. La mujer parpadeó y ensayó un movimiento indeterminado. Gritó y abrió los ojos. «¿Qué le pasó? ¿Te puedo ayudar?», murmuró Pablo. La mujer gritó de nuevo mirando al aire oscuro y encogió los brazos y las piernas. «No te quiero hacer daño. Te escuché quejarte. Estabas acá, debajo de unos cartones. Te desmayaste. No sé quién sos. ¿Te ayudo?». Era joven. Tenía puesto una blusa de manga larga, una pollera corta y unas sandalias. Tenía la boca partida verticalmente de un golpe cerca de la comisura izquierda y el pelo blanco de polvo.
Bien, voy a leerles un capítulo de la primera parte del Tríptico de la Infamia, donde el pintor Jacques Lemoine está opinando sobre los tatuajes que ve en una comunidad indígena en lo que hoy es la Florida en el siglo XVI.
So this is a chapter in Tríptico de la Infamia that where the writer, the artist is reflecting and giving his opinion on some tattoos that he sees in the Native Americans of what now is Florida.
Entre tanto, y pasada la primera parte de su aprendizaje, Jacques Lemoine empezó a entender el significado de los colores. En la paleta indígena, el rojo era el color protagonista. Se destinaba a los párpados, coronaba la nariz, ampliaba la frente, volvía más laberínticas las orejas y más provocativos los labios. Se amalgamaba a las pieles de los indios, que eran amarillentas o cetrinas. El rojo parecía ser el matiz de la seducción y la protección, de la rabia, la pasión amorosa y el prestigio. Estaba ligado a la vida y a la muerte, pero así avanzara en el conocimiento de estas significaciones, Lemoine intuía que lo esencial de los tatuajes permanecía muy lejos de su comprensión. Algunos dibujos, por ejemplo, tenían que ver con el duelo, cuando alguien moría. Este duelo, no obstante, estaba tan estratificado que se volvía confuso a sus ojos. El dolor ante la ausencia de un ser querido no era el mismo entre los apenados, y los dibujos se referían a esta tristeza complejamente fragmentada. La mujer y los hijos del muerto se pintaban de negro desde los pies hasta la cabeza, los padres solo las piernas, los hermanos los brazos. Luego venía una dosificación del luto que alcanzaba límites de pequeñez insospechada. Había algunos asistentes al rito que tenían pintados unos círculos casi invisibles en las sienes. Otros diseños, por lo demás, favorecían el paso de una edad a otra. A las púberes les pintaban 3 lunas o 3 estrellas en el rostro, una en la frente y otra en cada mejilla. Por la nariz bajaban en tonalidades blancas hileras de puntos que se detenían, y el efecto que producían era el de la apacibilidad en el cuenco que hacía el labio inferior con la cumbamba. El motivo del semblante continuaba en los brazos y en los pechos aún tiernos, de tal modo que esta irradiación de astros blancos decía que el inicio o despertar de los humores de las hembras poseía una jubilosa resonancia cósmica. Pero había otros cuerpos que parecían estar suspendidos en todas las edades o en una más que en otra, como si quisieran afirmar que el humano, en cualquier periodo de su vida, era una fugitiva condensación de tiempos diferentes. Lemoine se conformaba con un razonamiento fácil al decirse que aquel viejo se volvía niño o ese joven se precipitaba a la vejez a través de los colores por razones de nostalgia o de ensoñación. Si el corte de los cabellos marcaba para la justicia europea la degradación y la infamia, los indios de América se comportaban frente a la libertad y la esclavitud también pictóricamente. Se dibujaban pétalos o semillas en el mentón y las orejas, o los brazos y el pecho para señalar a los hombres libres, mientras que los esclavos estaban signados con huesos sobre la frente y las mejillas. Para Lemoine era motivo de sorpresa constatar que por el simple hecho de estar invadidos de soles y no por razones directamente fisiológicas, los nativos se alebrestaban y se disponían mejor a las arremetidas del deseo. Había otros que finalmente se enloquecían en el color y se embadurnaban el cuerpo desde el pelo hasta las uñas de los pies con una sustancia que los hacía nebulosos. Esos eran tipos de existencia marginal que, debido al mismo ímpetu de sus matices, se volvían después pábulo de admiración para el resto de la tribu, pues los hombres y las mujeres que un día antes parecían ser parte del trajinar cotidiano de la comunidad se hundían en una demencia temida y a la vez admirada por los otros al ser invadidos por esa coloración sombría. Gracias.
It's nice to hear the prose in its original language. It's also, you get the idea of how the book is. I encourage you to keep reading. The books are over there. If you want, after the talk, you can I think buy some of the books from them. And I think we have time for maybe one question. If someone wants to ask something, We have a mic over there, so you can ask for it, and if anyone wants, we can wait.
Don't be shy.
A question for some of them, or maybe for the three of them.
Yo creo que esto es para los tres. Me parecería interesante, cada uno tiene su visión antes de la cuestión. ¿Cómo ven el panorama de la literatura en lengua española traducida a otros idiomas, especialmente aquí en Europa?
Does anyone need us to translate the question? Could you, please?
So how do you see the Latin American and literature in the translated scene in other languages, especially here in Europe? What are your perceptions about that world?
Bueno, por un lado están lo que publican los grandes consorcios editoriales de Europa. Y obviamente si uno ve el panorama de lo que publican, pues le dan un mayor espacio a los escritores, digamos, más comerciales. Pero es verdad que también hay pequeñas editoriales, el caso por ejemplo de Aurora Boreal en Dinamarca, que le está dando espacio a otro tipo de escritores, más ocultos, más escondidos, pero no por eso menos interesantes que los otros. Entonces yo creo que hay un panorama diverso. Evidentemente, cuando estos grandes editores publican la literatura, lo hacen a partir de los grandes premios, por ejemplo, que ganan los escritores, o también es muy importante resaltar la figura del agente literario, una entidad que hace años no existía y que ahora es muy importante porque son los agentes, en realidad, en gran medida, los que posibilitan, digamos, la traducción de muchos libros de lengua española en Europa.
Obviously a lot of the big publishing companies give more space to the more commercial writers, so to speak. But there are also a lot of smaller publishing houses such as Aurora Boreal that give other types of writers space and attention. These writers are not necessarily less interesting, but just a little bit more hidden. And a lot of the literature that gets translated is usually connected to the big literary prizes that are awarded in Europe. And also he speaks about the role of the literary agent, which is something that hasn't existed all the time, that during the recent years has become a very important function of making sure that Spanish literature gets translated to other languages.
Would any of you want to add something? We have
Yes. I wouldn't,
little
for instance, I found here in Europe lots of publishing houses which are not precisely small. I wouldn't call Aurora Boreal a small publishing house. I would call it creative, and brave and an inventive publishing house. Nobody knows where the seed of commercial success is planted. So I think that I'm very grateful to the publishing industry here in Europe. I found, at least in my limited experience, a good receiving attitude. In Argentina we have lots of problems. writers have lots of problems to get published. I'm not going to explain that because it's too long and controversial. But I think that translating is, of course, creating a new version of the text. But welcome to the new versions, because you can read the translation they've made of you and then write on something based on the translation or taking advantage of the translation. So it's all right. Once a book is written, it becomes a property of everybody. So everybody begins to transform it. No? I think that if Michelangelo came here and saw the Moses, would say, I don't like that elbow, and would begin with a chisel again. And, no? So that there's nothing definitive about a book, and if it's translated, much the better, much the better.
Andrea, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just to add other idea. Of course, the connection is not easy. The connection between Latin American writers and publishing house in Europe. It's not easy. And at the same time, it's very hard. There are so many canons, and I like that. Even as a Chilean writer and a Chilean reader, I'm very lost in the actual new books. For example, right now there's 100 independent publishing house. So it's very hard to read all this overview. Yes. So the different canons, I think it makes very challenging how you follow this as a reader and as a European publishing house.
Of course, it's very difficult to choose
to move in this.
Yeah, choose. Of course, for foreign publishers also.
This huge amount of new books.
What do they translate? Yeah. Thank you for the question. Okay, I think we don't have any more time, but...
Tengo una pequeña pregunta para Pablo. Pablo,
Final question.
Pablo, la novela que tú escribes, que tú has presentado, se desarrolla en el siglo XVI, ¿no es cierto? A mí me preocupa la situación que hay en ese momento y lo que puede representar una pintura hecha por unos pintores protestantes, ¿no? O sea, en ese momento el mundo está quebrado en un imperio euroamericano bajo la casa de Austria y los países emergentes protestantes que apenas participan de la riqueza del Nuevo Mundo, sino es a través de la piratería holandesa o inglesa. Entonces, me parece que la mirada de unos pintores puede ser muy tendenciosa. Es casi una guerra fría lo que existe. Y me gustaría saber si logras evitar que la mirada de unos pintores protestantes sobre lo que pasa en América no se transmita a tu novela. O sea, ¿cómo tú resuelves ese problema? Porque ser pintor protestante en esa época es ser de alguna manera una especie de agitador anticatólico, antiespañol. ¿Cómo tú resuelves ese problema?
Big question.
Hay que llegar a ver.
Bueno, la novela Tríptico de la Infamia cuenta la historia de tres pintores perseguidos por el poder católico, es verdad, y que tienen una relación con América, digamos, simpática, de simpatía por los nativos. Esto hace, por supuesto, que haya una crítica radical a la conquista de América cometida por los conquistadores españoles. No significa, por supuesto, ni mucho menos, que haya una loa a la conquista realizada por los protestantes. La parte que yo trabajo en la novela es una expedición hugonote francesa que se intentó establecer en lo que hoy es la Florida, en el siglo XVI, con desastrosos resultados. porque fue una expedición ingenua, poco experta en esas labores de conquista, y que sería arrasada por el poder católico de Felipe II. O sea que yo abordo una expedición malograda, que tuvo tintes utópicos, que querían construir un territorio de paz, una comunidad de paz. Evidentemente, en ninguna parte de la novela, creo yo, se hace un elogio de la colonización protestante que se hizo en América del Norte, porque eso vendrá después, en el siglo XVII y XVIII. Yo creo que la novela mía está fundada particularmente en las denuncias que hicieron tanto los protestantes como los católicos de la conquista española.